Welcome back to Knowledge Distillation, where we explore how AI is reshaping the role of the data analyst. I'm your host, Katrin Ribant, CEO and founder of Ask Why. My guest today is someone I've known for 15 years, back when we were both riding the first wave of what would become the data revolution. Mike Driscoll is the co-founder and CEO of Rill Data, but before that, Mike founded MetaMarkets in 2010, where he co-invented Apache Druid, one of the most important real-time analytics databases of the last decade, and we'll talk about that. Mike, you're also a founding partner of Data Collective, a VC fund that raised over $1 billion to fund data ventures. And before that, when we met in 2010, you founded Dataspora, a data science consultancy back when data scientist was all the rage. I mean, technically before data scientist was all the rage. I should also mention that you hold a PhD in bioinformatics. So I'd like to start with that, actually. Can you tell us a bit about that? What is bioinformatics, and how did you end up deciding to have an entrepreneur career and a VC career, both in analytics?
Well, there's one company that I started before I did my PhD, and it was a retailer, one of the early online retailers called CustomInc.com. It's a t-shirt business. And I think in some ways, the way I ended up doing a PhD in bioinformatics is that I had gone very deep into custom apparel as an entrepreneur. And almost a year into that, I realized that if I continued on this path, I would be kind of in the t-shirt world potentially for decades. And I realized that I didn't just want to be an entrepreneur. I loved data. I loved computer science. I was sort of a frustrated computer scientist. I'd never really been technical in undergraduate. So I sold that business to my college roommate who went on to run it for 25 years. If anyone's ever bought t-shirts online, you probably have heard of Custom Ink. And I left for grad school. And so what is bioinformatics? It's really computer science and biology. It's some people call it computational biology, but the way I got into it is I was a self-taught programmer and was working for the Human Genome Project as a developer. Um, and it was just fascinating to me. I've always loved data, and the origins of big data, actually, that term really come from the life sciences. It was this recognition that we've got our DNA is this incredible rich trove of information. And so at that point, this is the late 1990s, early 2000s, we were sequencing the human genome. We'd started with Drosophila, which is the fruit fly. And we were doing some really interesting techniques to sequence the human genome. And I found that absolutely fascinating. And I decided, rather than become a t-shirt entrepreneur for the rest of my life, I actually went to that PhD program thinking I would become a biotech entrepreneur. Of course, as the saying says, man plans and God laughs. So I had a plan, but ultimately
Yes.
I ended up going in a different direction. But yeah, that's how I ended up in computational biology, bioinformatics, was leaving e-commerce and inspired by the data and the life sciences.
So, Mike, you and I met at the onset of the rise of the data scientist around 2010. This was before Harvard Business Review declared it the sexiest job of the 21st century in 2012. And when everyone was scrambling to figure out like what is actually meant. I remember those debates at the time. This is not about that debate, by the way.
Yes.
At the time, I was migrating Havas's data platform from Oracle, basically, to an MPP architecture. And I was in the process of selecting a vendor amongst the MPP sort of darlings of the time. And my POC included Netezza, Vertica, Greenplum, and a few others. And the founder of Greenplum, Scott Yara, which I ended up selecting actually Greenplum, introduced us during the workshop. I remember you were really in the trenches solving the hardest technical problems in high-scale real-time analytics. So tell us about the life of an analyst in 2010, like the issues with managing queries at scale and how using AI/ML really looked like at that point.
Sure. I mean, it's you know, it's incredible sometimes to look back and
It's only
and
15 years.
right. And how many cycles of Moore's law have we had? Right, 10 cycles of Moore's law in 15 years, and so at the time, the data seemed enormous that, I distinctly remember being in New York when we met, and as I was brought in as a consultant to the Green Plum team as their kind of data scientist for hire, you know, uh, gosh, everything was back then was new. AWS, was nascent. um, the idea of kind of massive parallel MPP databases was new. Greenplum was based on Postgres. It was a distributed Postgres engine. Postgres, of course, continues to thrive today. I mean, in some ways, things change, but they stay the same. I think one of the things that has always been a challenge in the world when you're a data analyst is really the data transformation and the data preparation. So what I recall from those early days of working with Greenplum, and I think Havas was one of the clients we worked with. Boy, moving data out of Oracle, for instance, into another system was always a huge headache. I remember working with one of Scott's colleagues, and so data movement, orchestration, ETL was often 80% of the effort.
That project cost me a few years of my life,
Right.
for sure.
My first gray hairs came in at that point. But I also recall again similar trends. One of the very common themes we saw was that while we could design analytics and run, for instance, and back then I was very heavily involved in the R community. We were using the open source R um, programming language for doing statistical analysis that was very popular among the data scientists at the time. Well, we could get something running, on a laptop with a sample of data. Again, scaling up that analysis and having it run in a system like Greenplum was also a major hurdle. And so what I recall again working with Havas was that, you know, just translating those models from something you could get to work on a, small an hour or a day of data and then migrating it to something that could work on, a month or, a year of data. Um, that was always a challenge. We were kind of rewriting our scripts and rewriting kind of linear regressions.
We were doing sophisticated things for the time. I mean, we had, user level data on the hit level, and we were doing
Yes.
attribution, like dynamic attribution modeling on that in
Yes.
2010, right?
Yes.
That wasn't popular at the time.
Yeah. There were really no out of the box solutions, I think, for the things we were working on. And um, yeah, so it was definitely the early days. And I think,
Yeah,
big data was not that big, right? The data
it
we
really
thought,
wasn't that big, no. But back then, the challenge was simply having tools powerful enough to handle vast amounts of data, which, sure, weren't that big at the time, but, still too big for the tools, right?
yes,
Today, largely, that problem is solved-ish, but reasonably good enough, I would say.
yes,
We have incredible databases, transformation pipelines, BI platforms, but now we face something, I think, far more subtle and far more critical. It's maintaining context throughout the entire analytics process. So let's have a look at that evolution and how we get to where we are today. So do you want to talk to us a little bit about Druid and MetaMarkets?
sure, sure. So I think, y- and maybe I'll try to embed it I think a larger context, which kind of a through line as we look back at
Mhm.
2010 to the present. I think that one of one of the reasons why many of us who love data analysis end up in the world of media and publishing and advertising is because that's where the data is. If
Lots of data and lots of analysis.
the media business was one of the first to digitally transform. The products are digital,
Yeah.
and so kind of getting digital signal and exhaust from the consumption of digital media is a sort of natural a very natural thing. I think outside of essentially IT observability, the places where like folks like Splunk play, I think digital media has always really been the tip of the spear for innovation and analytics and data infrastructure. And so when we started MetaMarkets, yeah, there was an issue where Hadoop was solving the problem of scale. Hadoop had come on the scene, and um, obviously now we've evolved to things like Spark, but scale was something that was at least solved. What was not solved was speed at scale, and the vision that I had was I really wanted end users who were doing analytics and observing uh, trends for advertising campaigns or trying to sort of go deep and do user level analysis, cohort, understand how different cohorts were performing. The all of the questions that many folks want to ask of their data, those questions, frankly, would take too long to answer in an interactive manner with something like Hadoop on the back end. And so my experience with Greenplum uh, really inspired me. And Greenplum was a very powerful engine for delivering speed at scale. It was one of the first, but it still really wasn't designed for the level of concurrency that we were looking to deliver for kind of user facing dashboards. So our early customers at MetaMarkets were digital advertising platforms like Jim Payne's MoPub was an early customer, ultimately acquired by Twitter. um, OpenX was still around, one of the early platforms. Um, and so we decided to build, we did what often is a crazy thing. We decided to roll our own database. We had a very narrow set of use cases and requirements for powering interactive dashboards at, let's say, a multi 100 gigabyte scale, which at the time was a lot of data. And so one of our engineers had an idea and for an architecture that I think he always wanted to build. And so we basically developed Druid as an in-memory, columnar, distributed data store. It was a NoSQL data store. It didn't have SQL support, and we used that for probably the next 8 years until we were acquired by Snap. Druid powered all of our interactive dashboards for um, all of the leading digital media platforms out there. So that was the genesis, was just trying to build a something that was fat, not just scalable, but had high performance at scale.
And I remember at the time you had to be very specific about the use case that you serve because, you remember we competed a few times in pitches, right? And we were asking each other, we were like, but why are we in the same pitch?
Right.
Why,
You're at
why,
Datarama, right.
Yes,
Yes.
and why did they put MetaMarkets and Datarama in the same pitch? Because I mean, MetaMarkets serves one type of use cases, Datarama serves pretty much exactly the opposite type of
Right.
use case.
Right.
How is that confusing to anyone? And I suppose that really speaks to the type of confusion there is in any emerging technology when
Yes.
something is new. The market doesn't really understand the nuances of what is what, and you
Yes.
end up lumped in categories that really you don't belong to, right?
Right.
And so then from MetaMarkets acquisition by Snap in 2017, I think, right,
Yes.
to real today, how did your thinking about the analyst's role evolve, and how did that lead you to dashboards as code?
So I think the experience of going to Snap was illuminating because it I think one of the questions we always asked ourselves at MetaMarkets was, is this very powerful, interactive, exploratory tool that we've built, does it have use cases beyond digital media platforms? That's where we had been quite successful in building tens of millions of dollars of recurring revenue in that vertical. And we ultimately made the decision to exit the business. But I think I always in the back of my mind thought, could this be valuable beyond the sets of kind of vertical use cases we defined. I think when we got to Snap, we saw that analytics platform um, was valuable. Snap began an Elasticsearch stack that they had built and migrated a lot of their analytics onto the platform that we brought in through MetaMarkets, and it was involved not just in obviously advertising optimization, which was critical for Snap at that period, but also for experimentation, for crash analytics. At the time, they were trying to launch an Android app, and so quite literally looking at a trillion plus events a day coming back from all of the telemetry of their user base at scale, and trying to get an Android app that didn't crash built. So that led me to I confirmed that this tech was valuable, from our philosophy was valuable, beyond the use case that was in the meta markets. And the in terms of the role of the analyst, I think the hardest thing um, for a lot of technologies is their adoption. And so uh, meta markets was an enterprise sales motion. It took weeks to months to get customers on board. And around, I guess 2017, 2018, um, I looked at some of the emerging platforms that developers were adopting, and I think we saw things like what was Next.js that ultimately became Vercel. I saw the rise of infrastructure as code companies like HashiCorp doing quite well. Grafana Labs ultimately, I think was very inspiring, and so I think there was this set of led uh, developer-led growth, companies where they made it very easy to adopt their tool. And Druid was never that easy to adopt either, even as an open source, database. And so, really, I think my shift was to recognize that analysts um, were becoming more technical, or at least there was a cohort of analysts that were becoming
Oh,
more
I
technical.
think it's a general movement. Analysts have become considerably more technical. I think across the span of the analytics roles, there's definitely be a strong shift.
And so we sort of see, and people talked about this term analytics engineer. We saw the rise of, DBT out of Fishtown Analytics, where you had a group of analysts who were comfortable not just writing SQL, but using something like Git, Python, becoming more and more used in the analyst community. And so what I've sort of witnessed was maybe that analysts on one end of the continuum, analytical engineers, data engineers, there's sort of this compression where folks were able to be a data engineer writing maybe an ETL pipeline, but also able to write some Python to do transformation and get their data from an object store into a database, and then even write some SQL to get a dashboard built. Whether that be a Grafana dashboard or something like Superset or Tableau or Looker. And so that was kind of the thesis was, could we build something that was similar, inspired by MetaMarkets? We actually ended up spinning the core tech out of Snap, the MetaMarkets technology and stack, and rebuilding it from the ground up. But what we added was this layer of BI as code to say, can we let analysts define an entire stack from data to dashboard in a single GitHub repo? Um, and and so that's the journey we've been on. And then there was an observation that there was a rise of, while Druid was a great first generation analytics database, I think there's a new class of real time analytical databases like ClickHouse and DuckDB and StarRox and Pinot that actually deliver the performance at scale that we felt is necessary for the kinds of data applications that we want to deliver at Rill. So yeah, I think the evolution was just thinking that um, analysts are much more capable than they were 10 or 15 years ago. And could we lean into that and lean into this sort of um, code first trend that we were observing having success in a lot of other areas of software?
It's fascinating, right? Because I so agree with you with the shift to the left of the skill set of, the average the average analyst across the board, from data engineer to business analyst, right? There's really that really has happened. I think that is reinforced by the rise of the AI analysts, because having code generated for you really does help that shift to the left.
Yes.
I also do think that LLMs help the shift to the right, because you do have an ability to have more business context and to have better visualization skills, better
Mhm.
storytelling telling skills, with the help of whoever, Claude, or whoever you like to use. In my case, it's Claude, who's my favorite for that. But it does really help a shift to the life that to the right as well. And so our thesis is that the rise of the AI analyst basically powers a full stack shift
Yes.
of the skill set. Not that everybody will become a specialist in everything, but I think that your general skills as an analyst become the foundation of you being able to leverage additional help to expand your skill set, right? And hence fight commoditization of your jobs, etc. I think that happens to software engineer first.
Mhm.
We've observed that, right? I mean, we've got the rise of the AI engineer that we've been able to observe. I think that also powers a lot of confusion in the market, because
Mhm.
when I look at AI analyst jobs currently in the market, there is this big confusion between, we want a software engineer that will set up infrastructure, but they should also be a data scientist,
Right.
and there should also be a data scientist who has built LLMs, preferably, right? Or been close to somebody who built LLMs, maybe that counts. But they should also be able to do like just, data analysis and present dashboards to stakeholders. Uh,
Right.
I mean, it's kind of really funny in a way when you look at those job descriptions. It's also really not funny. Again,
Yes.
speaks to the confusion in the market at the beginning of, any big trend.
Yeah.
Do you see some of that with your clients, with the people that you work with? Like, you work with a very technical user, right? What do you see?
So first, I think you put your finger on it when you said we're kind of at the early, we're in the early chapters of this, you know, AI revolution that's changing every aspect of both software development as well as sort of business processes. I do think we still do have effectively there's two stakeholders that we work with, and I think many companies work with, which is you have developers that are implementing tools, um, and analysts to some extent, kind of increasingly, I think, are moving towards that sort of developer persona. And then you have business users who are, using the tools, um, that the AI analyst or AI engineer kind of sets up for them. I think that there's a gap, obviously, that's always been there, um, where the business users often have the domain expertise, they have the business questions, they have the they have that sort of tacit knowledge of um, of what metrics matter and what the right, what questions to ask. I think the opportunity, you talk about sort of bridging this gap. This gap has always existed and been a huge issue. I think if you think about the way that this analytics supply chain has traditionally worked, it has been sort of it's been broken, frankly, for years, right? You have this idea of a business user, like the chief marketing officer says, "Hey, why are conversions down today?" And they kind of throw that question over the wall. Maybe they write a Jira ticket, and there's a data team that picks it up, and maybe they build a dashboard, and that dashboard gets sent back to the CMO, and then of course it's never the end of the discussion. The CMO says, I want to know why in Phoenix we saw this particular drop, or why in APAC Android devices were not converting as well. Or there's always a question that follows every question, and that ping pong ball of Jira tickets or that back and forth today is just so slow, right? And so I think the promise And the excitement of, um, AI powered analytics is really to, um, maybe bridge this gap where instead of, humans on the data team that are getting that ticket when they wake up in the morning and then, building a pipeline and building a dashboard that we probably are going to see. And by the way, I think the employment numbers already sort of back this up. I do think that a lot of data teams are going to drastically reduce their size. We are going to be replacing data teams with analyst agents who will, instead of waiting for that Jira ticket, picking it up and taking a few hours. I think we have now the opportunity for the CMO to get answers from a conversational prompt about why conversions are down, and APAC for Android devices. That answer could come back maybe in minutes. Um, and so then the question is, what's the role of the analyst in this new world? I think the analyst is not the person who's fishing. The old saying of give a person the fish and they eat for a day, and teach them the fish and they eat for a lifetime. I think that the real role of these AI engineers, AI analysts, is to set up the systems that the business users interact with. And so, data teams are not giving answers; they're building tool chains. They're creating infrastructure that the business can use. And so, what does that infrastructure look like? I've got some theories of what types of infrastructure. You and I are both, building tools that I think this next generation set of teams should stand up. But I think there is promise, finally, for companies to go beyond dashboards and go beyond kind of Jira tickets and data teams and this sort of almost sclerotic, slow, bureaucratic way of doing, being data driven, and replace it with something much more fluid and natural in terms of how business users interface with the most critical data and metrics in their business. I think we're on the cusp of that, and that's really the role of the analyst. I think is um, to create, set up these internal tools which will streamline for the first time self-serve analytics inside of businesses.
So you and I are both on the tool building side of that revolution, right? But for the AI analysts that are listening, what, in your point of view, and with the types of users that you are obviously interacting with, but also, got a very long career behind you. You've hired a lot of people. You've seen a lot of different eras and different evolutions, different crazes for different languages and different technologies and all of that stuff. We've
Yes.
all seen quite a bit of that. If you think about being an AI or a digital analyst today, shifting to become an AI analyst, upskilling to get the best out of this new technology to help them, what would you say would be the areas that they should focus on in terms of upskilling? Is it prompt engineering? Is it what is it?
I am a strong believer that data engineering remains an absolutely critical skill for,
Oh, I agree. I
and
agree.
and it's a superpower for analysts because, I'll tell a story of, going harkening back to our early days of big data. One of the signature events at that period was when Netflix, open sourced, uh, uh, a portion of their ratings data, and they initiated what was called the Netflix Prize, um, to say they were going to award, I think it was $1 million for, um, a machine learning scientist that could have the best prediction, of which movies their Netflix users were likely to watch based on their um, historical rating patterns. And it was a great sort of corpus of real data to test this idea that could we do predictive analytics at scale? And Netflix and their being smart said, yeah, we'll open source this and we'll have a Netflix prize where every week I think they released new data and a new data set, and folks would try to predict what Netflix users were watching. And what I remember talking to some of the prize contestants was one of them I was talking to was a PhD at Berkeley, and he said how he was in the statistics department, and so many statisticians would come to him and say, "Oh, David, you should try this algorithm. This algorithm would be a lot more powerful." And he would say, "Sure, well, you could try it yourself." But they had no ability to get the so much of the data prep work of getting the data from Netflix, putting it into a matrix that would fit in memory. There was just a lot of work to prepare and get that data amenable for analysis. That was ETL work. And the vast majority of people who wanted to compete in the Netflix prize didn't have any data engineering skills. They needed that data to be put on a silver plate for them. And that's a huge crutch for folks. And so I think, especially in the era of Claude and Copilot, and now we've got Codex. Um, I think that if an analyst is able, not just to build, a metrics layer or a semantic layer, or build dashboards or visualizations or prompts, but to go down the stack and actually be able to orchestrate raw logs of data, get close to the source, and actually get that data all the way through the stack to business users. I think that's a superpower, and that does require data engineering skill. It's getting easier. Again, the AI agents can help you write transformation code to extract from a data lake, or object storage, and get it into a database like ClickHouse, or Redshift or Snowflake, as you desire. So I think data engineering is critical, because what you actually have the opportunity to come true there is the one human data team. I think people talk about the one person, billion-dollar company, which I think we're on the cusp of seeing that. But I think uh, AI provides leverage, and so I think we're on the cusp of seeing one person data teams that can really span the gamut from data engineer to analyst. And I've seen it actually. I've seen some of our users at Rill are CTOs and VPs of engineering, who on the one hand have business context because they're in the meetings with the CMO and the CFO, and on the other hand, they know where the data lives. They've got the credentials. They know where their Cloudflare logs are located, and they are capable in a couple of hours of essentially getting to the bottom of really mission critical business questions, and again build a tool that can answer key business questions, and without having to bring a team of folks, and frankly without having to bring 17 SaaS vendors of the modern stack into the picture.
Well, that really is a dream skill set, right? Being able to go like fully to the left and then extend fully full stack. And I think the critical aspect is really in that is obviously you have to have the technical skills, because you can generate all the code you want. If you don't know how to architect, it's not going to be very good.
Right.
So you really do need to have skills there. And so much of the data engineering, the pipeline creation is about the business context, because
Yes.
you can put that data together in many ways and most of them are not very useful.
That's
You really do need to understand something about how it's going to be used in order to create the data pipeline correctly.
right. Absolutely. Which is why it's so valuable if you can, if you can traverse that, go all the way from the left of data engineering and pipelines all the way to the right of the business use cases. It is so powerful because, we use that term predicate pushdown um, in analytics, where, if you're going to filter data out, you'd like to filter it out at the database level, not after you've, moved all that data out of the database. You'll save. It's much more efficient to push logic down the stack. Similarly, I mean, in our world, for example, in digital media, um, not every um, not every advertising event is created equal, and we know that in online programmatic auctions, um, you know, oftentimes in any auction marketplace, you'll have many bidders, and only one bidder will win an auction. And if you don't have that business context to know that it's the winning bid that matters, um, you can end up carrying around, 2 orders of magnitude more data than you need to answer a business question at the end of that pipeline. And so the ability to kind of, I would say, filter out a lot of the noise and enrich the signal, have that requires business expertise to know what signal is really important and what log files you might be able to sample, um, or even just throw away, and throw that away at the beginning of your analysis. So a lot of data engineers don't have that business context.
That's fascinating because that almost answers what was going to be my next question. I think really the main challenge is the context and the continuity of the context across the entire process, right? And if you have only one person managing that whole process, then you can consider that that person has all the context, but then if you have questions, you also always have to go to that person, right?
Yes.
And that person has limited time,
Yes.
like everybody. Um, Embedding the context in the process, in the tools,
Yes.
we used to hear, oh, you have to do documentation, which is very funny when you've been in this for 20 years, right? You're like, yeah, show me one instance when that actually works.
Yes.
The context has to be something that is alive and that has to be, that is, automated with every interaction, and it has to be something that is intelligent because it has to handle exactly the kind of scenarios that you just mentioned, right? Um, how do you see that context question come in teams? I'm not talking about the one person data team, right?
Yes.
But come in the type of teams that Real works with.
Well, I think there's you know 2 broad categories of context that really, matter, and one is a lot easier to solve for than the other. The first, but both very valuable. The first, um, I would say category of context is sort of macro context. This is what the large language models are actually great at. They have a notion of, what an advertising campaign is. They have a notion of what, an auction is. They understand sort of, uh, you know, uh, conceptual entities, frankly, better than any junior or even senior data engineer might know. And so I've seen with great success, if you give a data set to an LLM and you say, um, can you sort of define a set of, um, an ontology for this data set? Can you provide me a set of, dimensions and measures that are useful for a BI tool, from this data set? It will do a very good job at defining a metric like MAU or DAU, um, given user session logs, and it will, which is fantastic. That's often better than most data engineers would do. It's got a world model, um, and so that's great. Uh, the second category of context, I would say, I don't know if I would call it micro context, but I might call it, company domain context, is that while, there's a set of concepts out there in the world that MAU and DAU that everyone uses, you and I know from working
Oh,
with lots of
yes.
companies that every company has their own bespoke custom concepts and ontologies
And
and
generally, every
terms.
department has their own variation and takes the source for different fields in different systems.
Right. And this is the messy reality. Probably one of the only areas where things have gotten a little cleaned up after centuries is, you look at accounting, right? Which is kind of in some ways the first real, data scientists and, data analysts worked, were counting money, and we have the generally accepted accounting principles gap, that defines a set of standards. After centuries, we can finally mostly agree on what EBITDA and profit and bookings and, these terms are, these metrics are.
Finally, mostly, yes.
Mostly, right? We still see people
Yes.
on Wall Street debating, and gaming these metrics. But when we talk about what is a customer, how do we count active customers? Um, that's still, there's a lot of, right, and forget customers. How do we count whether, an item was shipped? Is it, or an item was returned, or all of these bespoke concepts that every company has? That's, I think, could be extremely challenging, and that's where I think there's opportunity.
And
Um,
also, it's sometimes just very operationally sound to have differences. Like, what
yes,
is revenue? If I want to optimize my ads, it's going to be revenue that is counted by my ads pixel. If I
yes,
want to optimize overall, it's going to be revenue deduplicated in GA4
right,
or
right.
whatever counts that. Like, operationally, it makes complete sense to have that
Yes.
flexibility.
Yes, sure, and I think we've seen again in the world of, let's say retail, retail advertisers. If you're Warby Parker, or you're, if you're Netflix and you're trying to optimize an advertising campaign, there are different ways to measure the return on that advertising
Mm.
spend. And so depending, like you said, you want that flexibility. Some retailers might say we want to optimize for number of glasses sold. Some people want to optimize for number of new customers that they sign up. So some want to optimize for just pure revenue. So there's so many ways that I think companies may decide that there's some metric that they want to optimize, uh, advertising spend for, as an example, that you need that flexibility, right? And if you're running a platform,
Yes.
you may you may be working with 100 different advertisers who all have different um,
Right.
metrics that they actually want to pay you based on a different set of metrics. So you need to be able to flex your measurement for all of those kind of combinations.
And so talking about, building this and automating those processes, in a world where we have analytics agents that allow us to automate some parts of our workflows and where AI analysts become sort of more orchestrators of these agents, than necessarily what we are today as analysts, which is mostly people who type on a keyboard and our operators are different of different platforms. Do you already see some of that within your users? And if you do, how does that manifest?
So if maybe flesh that out for me for a moment. You're suggesting this shift in how the AI analysts sort of do their role? Is that what you're
Yeah, well, basically, I'm thinking, currently, let's take a very simple example: code generation, right?
right?
What do you do when you get an LLM to generate code for you, or cursor, or whatever it is? You prompt it, it starts working, and depending on how good your prompt is and how good
Mm,
the agent and how complex, can take a while. You're not going to
right,
stare at your screen during that time, right?
right,
You're going
right,
to, in parallel, do another process, and in parallel, do another process. And then at some point, not right now, right? But you hope that at some point we get to a stage where process one is going to call you saying, "Hi,
ready.
decision point,
Hmm.
checkpoint here, please make a decision." And in analytics, this is probably a little more prevalent than in software engineering because
Right.
of that exact iteration loop that you mentioned about, we have a question, we have an
Yes.
answer that basically means three more questions.
Yes.
Because every decision point, every data point becomes a decision and a fork, right, in the
Yes.
process. And there is no unit test that tells
Right.
you everything you did is valid, right? So within a world like that, you end up spending more time sort of orchestrating different processes and
Yes.
architecting
Yes.
your
That's right.
processes. And this is something that talking to, somebody who handles a large data team in a company that actually builds tools as well.
Yeah.
Um, she told me, "Oh, we're actually, that project planning, that project management and that chunking and planning aspect is something that is difficult for a lot of people."
Yes.
So I'm thinking this is something, an aspect that we need upskilling in, right?
That's right.
It's sort of, I don't want to call it an analytics architecture because like, it's not about architecting tools. It's about architecting processes and sort
Yes.
of managing a virtual team that does part of these processes for you. So
Yes.
that's what I'm asking is like within the users that you that you have, because they're deeply technical and they're
Yes.
used to thinking architecturally because they have
Yes.
to architect complex systems for big data analytics.
Yes.
That's not simple, right?
Yes.
Do you see some of that already emerging?
For sure. I think, you know, in some ways we're seeing a shift in the nature of knowledge work from, as you mentioned, uh, for a long time you had kind of the managers and then the doers, right? And so a manager would say, we're going to break up this analytics project. I'm going to have my data engineer go write the pipeline. I'm going to have my analyst define a set of measures and dimensions on that data, and I'm going to have my collaborator in the marketing team um, give us input on the dashboards that we're going to design, right, for the business stakeholders. And I think now increasingly a lot of the work will be done by agents. And so any of us who are workers really become everyone becomes a manager, right? Everyone needs to learn how to um, break work up, how to frankly, prompting is a form of managing, how to clearly
It is.
communicate, right, to agents the task that needs doing. And so um absolutely, I think the those who are good break thinking about the architecture of a project and how to break it up into a set of smaller tasks that can be delegated, whether that was previously to humans and increasingly to agents, I think will be much more successful. I think that also, I think there's, and again, not unlike management, there's something that uh, you know, people talk about task relevant maturity in management, where depending on the maturity of a team member you're working with, do you let them work for days before you kind of check in and see how they're doing, or do you kind of have a daily check in, or even multiple times a day check in? I think right now in the current state of agents, I do think they're not very mature, and so the idea
Oh,
that
they're
we would let.
toddlers.
Yes, they're very junior, and so you would, just like you would never have an intern go off for 2 weeks and then come back and give you, the results of their work. And, a lot of people don't hire interns because they do require a lot of management, a lot of check-ins.
Yes.
Um, I would say that a lot of agents today are at the level of, like, intern level capability. Now, there's lots of
Yes.
them, but you do need to check in several times a day, and, uh just it that's gonna change. We're gonna see more and more maturity, but I think, the nature of work is shifting, and yes, people who the upskilling is, how do you manage workers, communicate with them, evaluate their work, give good feedback, all of these things that, frankly, not everyone loves to manage, right? Some people like just to write code, but writing
Yes.
code might go the way of data entry and, digging holes with a shovel. You know, Writing code may eventually not be a job that any human does. It
No, but I think reading code is, right? Because
absolutely.
what you expressed, I love this analogy at management because basically, as you said, prompting is like talking to your team.
Yes.
You need to know the LLM. You need to really understand LLMs. They're not magic, they're tools. You need to really understand how they work
Yes.
and how they're different. And
Yes.
that's, know your team.
Yes.
Um, Conversely, like, this is probably the first time in history where we can actually say, I wrote this, but I didn't read it. And a
Yes.
lot of people do. It's generally
Yes.
not a good result.
Yes.
If you
Yes.
generate code, you have to learn how to read it and
Right.
how to evaluate it
Absolutely.
because it still has to integrate with the rest of your system, etc. All of that still has to happen. And I think most importantly, you have to keep your critical sense about you. You
Yes.
have to you have to actually check everything.
Right. Right. Yes, absolutely. I think the role of architects is actually going to be even more important than ever. Um, uh, because I think, you it's not enough just to ask an agent to solve a problem with code. You really do need to hint about how you would like it to solve the problem, and you need to have enough expertise that you guide that agent to solve it, I think, uh, in a thoughtful way, because I I'll just observe that, just like junior, when I was a teaching assistant in graduate school, we observed that the best programmers would often write the shortest. Their homework assignments would have the fewest number lines of code to solve the problem.
Mhm.
Um, the least mature developers often, often solve problems with many more lines of code. And so
Yeah.
if you look at AI agents writing software today, they tend to be on the verbose side. Um, and uh, that can be a problem. Unmanaged, you end up with a lot of just,
Yeah.
slop essentially in your code base.
So, Mike, as usually when we talk, I could do this for hours. However, we are coming up at time and we sort of have to wrap up a little bit, unfortunately. So Rill is in public beta. You're tackling this data lake to dashboard in minutes vision, and you've got this unique architecture combining last mile ETL, in-memory database, operational dashboards, all in one tool. Where can people find Rill? So shameless plug time.
Yes.
Where should it go to try it out, and where should it follow your work? Keep up with what you're building. Also, are you hiring? Anything you want to sort of put out as a message.
Sure. Well, first, if you are a data engineer or a data engineering uh, uh, biased data analyst, you can use our tool and get it running on your local MacBook in literally seconds. Rilldata.com. It's RILL data.com. We are actually beyond public beta at this point. We're live with some of dozens of the largest enterprises in the world are using Rill today. Folks like Comcast, AT&T, some of the largest fintech firms are leveraging our tool. But we have a free open source Rill developer tool that you can run just on your own. And so folks who
And
are
this is just download. You don't even have to pay with your personal
Yep,
data.
that's right. You
That's
can run it
amazing.
locally. You can run it locally and securely, and yeah, we support DuckDB and ClickHouse on that tool. So, yeah, I would encourage any AI native data engineer that wants to impress your colleagues. You can build not just dashboards but conversational analytics in minutes with the tool. So we would love to. Uh, and we have a Discord channel if you want to hang out with a bunch of other data geeks that are trying Rel, which you can sign up for when you
It's
download.
fun. We're in that
Yep.
channel. It's fun.
Yes, it's a
We,
lot of fun.
I'm just gonna, shameless plug. We use Rill as well at Ask Why.
Of course, we love having you.
And so, well, thank you for that, Mike. It's been a pleasure. So that's episode 2 of Knowledge Distillation. If you're a data analyst trying to navigate this evolution from worrying about scale to worrying about context, check out askwhy.ai and try Prism. Thank you for listening. And remember, bots handle the what, AI analysts handle the why. Thanks to Tom Fuller for the editing magic on this episode. If you want to work with Tom, head to askwhy.ai and check out the show notes for his contact info.